True crime today.
Everyone responds to trauma differently, without a doubt. And with all of the cases that we cover for you here on True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast, there's a lot of very different ways that we see people react. We're going to talk about that and hear someone's feedback and phone call right now.
Lock your doors and hide your children. True crime today.
If you want to weigh in on any of the cases that we're covering for you, we'd love to hear from you and have some conversation about it. 888-5-KILLER is the phone number. 888-554-5537 is that phone number. Stacey Cole with me today. And we're going to take a call here, talking specifically about trauma response. Let's go right into that, and then we can chat about it after we hear this feedback. Hi.
Hi. My name is Carol. I'm calling from Texas. And I sent in a message over Twitter a few weeks ago about this, but it was never read, so I thought I would call. And it's about Alex Murdaugh and and his 911 call and that initial interview in the police vehicle. I know there have been witnesses on the show, experts on the show who have made the comment, everyone reacts to trauma in different ways. And it's absolutely true. But then the next person will come on, and not just there, all over social media saying, that's not how I would act if I just found, my loved one's murdered, or that's not how a person would act. And that's absolutely not true. I'm not trying to defend him. I don't know if he killed them or not. But I just need to correct this. Trauma does horrific things to the brain. It literally changes the brain. 3.5 years ago, I went through an incredibly traumatic experience. It's the worst thing that will ever happen to me in my life. And all these comments about, oh, he just said, how are you doing to that cop? Or why do you do this? Why do you do that? Because you are completely out of your mind when trauma happens. Your brain is broken. What happened to me is hard to speak about, but I'll go ahead and say it. My husband of 13 years shot himself in front of me. He died in my arms, and I've never been the same since. And anyone who has experienced something like that knows exactly what I'm talking about. When you sit there, when your house is just, there are lights everywhere, there are police, there are EMTs everywhere, and you are out of your mind. The most random, weird things will come out of your mouth. The way you act can seem insane to people. I could go on and on and on. This message can last so long, but I'll try to keep it brief. I don't even know how to keep going. For everyone who says they would not act like that, they would not say that, you'll have no idea. You don't know unless you have experienced that. And it is good that you don't understand. You don't want to understand. You don't want to relate to it. But every time I hear people say that, I'm not the only one who's experienced this. But every time I hear people say that,
yeah,
it does a great disservice and disrespect to those who have gone through it. The way I was that night, if there were a camera on me for the whole world to see, they would be saying the same thing about me. It's terrifying. Your brain is broken. Some studies are starting to show that the brain physically changes shape.
Mm-hmm. It does.
So unless this has happened to you, like, you have no idea how horrific it is. I remember sitting on the porch and all the police, all the EMTs were taking care of me, except for this one cop who just stared at me the whole time. And while I was going back and forth between like detachment and reality, I realized this cop thinks I did it. Oh my God, this cop thinks I did it. And when I was in the police car during my interview, I would start rambling about something completely unrelated. And I look back now, I'm like, that sounded crazy. Having to do a gunpowder residue test, a swab, terrifying. Not something you should have to worry about when going through something so traumatic. So I just ask, please consider the fact that if you have not gone through this or something similar, you have no idea how you will act, what you will say. Your brain has changed. Your emotions are on a roller coaster that I will never be able to explain in words. I really enjoy your podcast. I just had to get this out because it has been eating at me for weeks and weeks. It reminds me a lot of the dad whose child was shot at Sandy Hook, getting raked across the coals from all those Alex Jones people, just destroying him for laughing, having a moment of laughter before a press conference. Or the people who, even with Alex Murdaugh, oh, he's crying on cue. He'll be talking, then he stops and he starts crying. Yeah, that is a thing that happens. That happens. Your brain is so screwed up. It is indescribable. Anyway, thank you for listening. I do enjoy the show. Good night.
Thank you for that insight into having that sort of experience. I think a big thing with Murdaugh is the pattern of behavior. It's not just how was he acting at that moment in time. How was he acting after? How had he acted prior? Alec has pretty much been Alec the whole time, prior to the trauma or not. And it certainly is a case-by-case basis where you have to look at it. But when all the pieces of the Alec puzzle were put together, you saw this guy from the moment police arrived, from the moment of his 911 call, trying to steer the narrative. Most people, when they're in a trauma response, I know we're kind of saying, well, everybody reacts differently. Yes, but it can be completely random, like she talked about. Controlling the narrative is not necessarily usually one of them.
Yeah, that's true.
And that's the thing that was different with Murdaugh. He immediately had a narrative that he wanted to spin, and he stayed with it, and he lied about where he was and when. And yes, you can be completely out of it. And if that first night he realized, oh my God, I was scared and I shouldn't have said these things to the investigators, but I was afraid I was going to be had my finger pointed at me. He had ample time to come back and say, look, that was a trauma response. I know this looks bad on me, but here's my true timeline. I want you to know this because I want you to find who actually did this. He didn't do that till he was put in the corner of court and caught. There was no time that he actually finally said, this was completely wrong. So with Murdaugh, I agree. I think there's trauma there regardless. And he's obviously been convicted. So I'm going to go with he did it. I would imagine that you would have trauma even if you did do it. And your brain would be trying to reckon with the fact that you just saw your child's head and brain hit the ceiling and then fall down to his legs. That'd be traumatizing, whether you pulled the trigger or not. So I can imagine there were some parts of that where he was a little out of it, but there were so many things where he was trying to control the narrative, why he was doing this, why he even had the motive to do it. I don't think we're ever truly going to know the answer to it. But I kind of go into the family annihilator camp. Thoughts?
I think, well, first of all, her name was Carol, correct?
Yes.
And a horrifically sad story, and I'm so sorry, Carol, that you went through that. And yes, trauma does change a person. It changes the brain. It changes. It can even be passed down through generations.
Yeah.
It's a horrific thing. Alex Murdaugh, I think his story is, like you said, Tony, a bit different. That it looks like he was absolutely controlling the narrative, and yes, he was traumatized by what happened, but he also set it into motion.
Mm-hmm.
So it just feels different to me in that way. He wasn't necessarily a victim. He was the perpetrator.
Yeah.
So there's a different type of trauma that he was experiencing. He saw something horrific, but he was also the one who did it.
Yeah. And there's a big difference between being the victim, as Carol there was, versus being the perpetrator and trauma response. And I think that's key. But if you're looking at it from the perspective of is he innocent? Sure. That's where I think she's coming from. But in this case, in Alec, I don't agree. I don't think it was a trauma response. I think it was Alec being Alec. He did the same sort of shit when the Mallory Beach boat crash occurred, and his son is sitting there laughing about it and being difficult to all the nurses in the ICU. And he's wandering around with his badge trying to control the narrative immediately. It's exactly what he was trying to do after his wife and son died, control the narrative. So it wouldn't be falling back on him, which was the same thing with that one. His son did it, and let's control the narrative. Alex always is looking out for Alec. And I think some people, maybe it is a product of trauma response. I don't know what would have happened to Alec in his life, or what trauma happened beyond the murder here. If something happened in childhood where it's just, maybe that's shut down. Maybe there is no trauma response at some point for some people, because they're almost always acting in trauma response mode where things don't quite make up. They're going to say whatever they need to at the moment to get through it, and don't really realize the repercussions, or don't care because that part of the calculation of the brain's not working right.
Mm-hmm.
So
100%.
I know. Very insightful. Thank you for that. And I know it was difficult. I could totally hear it in her voice of just even approaching the subject and sharing that. I think it was good to hear it from that perspective. So you're completely right. I just think it was different in the Murdaugh case because of it being a perpetrator versus a victim.
Yeah. And that's how I see it too.
If you have some insights, some comments, theories on the cases that we're covering, let us know. You can call 24/7, 888-5-KILLER. That's 888-554-5537. We would love to hear your thoughts.
Lock your doors and